All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to today's session. I hope you had fun in yesterday's session, and we have brought to you another session, similar session with related to satellites. So, all the satellites people, well, that's great for you, and rocketry people, don't worry, we are bringing you sessions one by one, so no need to be afraid of. So, today we have with us a special guest. So, without any further ado, let me just quickly bring our guest onto the stage. So, with us, we have Dr. Narayan Prasad, who is currently the COO at Sat Search, which operates the world's largest marketplace for space industry, and he's also and he's also the director of research at Spaceport Sarabhai. He right. So he is also the curator of NewSpace India and the advisory board member of the SATCOM Industry Association India and SEDS India. So that is, or we have Mr. with us, Dr. Narayan Prasad. He was with us last time also in SSC 2021, and this time also he will be a judge in the satellites category. So if you guys want to interact with Dr. Narayan Prasad, the easiest step is to qualify for the grand finale and interact with him live. So thank you so much, Dr. Narayan Prasad, for coming to this live session and interacting with our audience. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for so much for inviting me back again. So it's always great to interact with young people. So I wish I was younger than what I am now.
No, no, you are young. Who said you're not? You are still young for us as well, and also in the industry. Well, you're quite being young, I would say that it's not a great thing because you have so much of experience and which we can learn from, and that is why we have brought you this session so we can learn from you. We can learn from your experiences in this industry. So, how are you doing currently? And what's the climate there? And where are you currently right now?
Oh, right now I'm actually at a friend's place who just got married, and we're just in the middle of just they live in a different place, so we're just visiting. So it's Berlin and it's summer, so it's sometime it's all vacation time here, so it's kind of calm and relaxed. So I know that in India you get like crazy traffic and so on. So now, but especially where I'm from in Bangalore, so here it's a little bit more relaxed at this time. But I'll be back in India like next month.
Oh, oh, that is great. That is great. When are you exactly reaching India?
I'll be there for the Bangalore Space Expo, so 2 weeks before.
Okay.
So end of August, I'll
All
be
right.
around. For 3 weeks, I'll be in India.
Okay, so welcome back to
Yeah,
India, and I hope you love the traffic which we have brought to you.
yeah,
All right. So that is great. Your country, Berlin, and it's summertime, and summer's always great in those nations. That's what we have heard. So let us start with your journey in the space sector, and how did you get, or how did you gain so many diverse experience? Because as I was saying, there's so many companies you're associated with. There's so much things which you have done, and so how do you gain, and how was your journey through this entire space sector?
yeah. I think every time every person has a different pathway. So I think that a lot of the Indians actually, when you look at them, most of them get inspired by astrophysics or science fiction when they are in school. Unfortunately, I was not really that big of a reader in school, and even now, I think if I normally read some sci-fi stuff, like I get to sleep in 2 minutes. So unfortunately, that's my kind of genes. So for me, I think I was a little bit more lucky because I had a bunch of friends who were interested in building technology and hardware and things like that. So I just happened to tag along with them, and we started building stuff around UAVs and drones, and then gliders, and then eventually we started working on satellite structures and so on. So I think if you are uninspired like I was, the best thing that you can do is go and work with somebody who is inspired, and you will probably find a way for yourself at that point of time, that you will then try to say that this is what I like. So I was somebody like that, I would say. So I was pretty lucky to have a bunch of friends who were very inspired in doing stuff, and I just got to ride on top of their inspiration quite a lot. So, and then I figured out, okay, I like uh, against aviation industry versus space industry, that doing projects in both the worlds. So I kind of said, okay, the space industry looks more exciting for me. So I just stepped into it, and eventually got my master's there, and then started building off the company and so on. But also, I think it's a little bit of you need a little bit of luck, you need a little bit of backing and so on. So it's really a mix of so many things at the end of the day. So but if you have the opportunity, I consider myself lucky because you need to there's only a very small fraction of the people who believe that they want to work in the industry will get to work in the space industry, especially as an Indian, because there are so many restrictions in this
Uh-huh.
industry, who can work and how can you work. But yeah, so if you want to step into the industry, it's a little bit of everything at the end of the day. But I would say from where I started to where it is now, the opportunities are 100 times more. So uh, that may be a ray of hope for a lot of people, because when we were starting out, the only thing that came to my mind is we should start something on our own as a company or something, because I didn't really see any like inspiration from other companies that I wanted to
Uh-huh.
just, okay, I want to join this company or the other. So but now of course you have like so many companies in India and other parts of the world that are doing interesting things, so you don't need to take that level of risk if you don't want to. But then you can also just prove yourself and then get into one of these companies and build your career on top of that.
All right. So, well, you have talked about all the various opportunities. We'll come back to all those
Yeah.
opportunities later. We'll come back to all this opportunity. We'll look back to that, that how it's now 100 times more better than at your time. And yes, we are going towards this. So we have, we'll discuss about them. So I'm just curious as to what is the first thing you built? You said about drones and UAVs. What is the first thing which you built? I'm a little curious about that.
Yeah, when we were in our undergraduate education, so as usual, we were all some small colleges and universities in India. So normally, apart from your academic courses, nothing really was appreciated and rated. So, but we had, I had a bunch of crazy friends who said, "Let's go try to build like a glider," and obviously, it's very low cost because we were trying to learn about aerodynamics and stuff like that, and going back to the basics of design principles. So we started putting in like small amounts of money, 1,000 2,000 rupees or so, and trying to go buy material like styrofoam or even normal thermocol or so on, and trying to experiment by producing our own aerofoil designs, and then
Hmm.
also coming up with the actual equipment that you would need to produce those foils, because obviously these foils need to be exact and perfect across the wingspan and so on. So we also had to come up with how do you actually produce that. So we were starting to using we were using like wire cutting heaters,
Okay.
heated wires and things like that, with a and then fixtures for that, so making it ultra low cost, but at the same time you could produce all of these things. And then naturally you then want to go into like once you get a glider right, and you can fly it from a rooftop of a big apartment building or so on, then the next thing to do is you start experimenting with a little bit of electronics. So you start putting an RC controller or a propeller, and then all of these other ailerons and things like that, so you have control over all of these surfaces. So then it gets complicated, and then you can go on to do other complicated things like trying to implement autopilot systems and so on. So we did experiment on a lot of these things, and we did that for a significant amount of time. Like we did that like for 2.5 years. So we were getting very good at building these kinds of things. So but in parallel we got an opportunity to work on with the Indian Institute of Astrophysics, and then that opened the door to really understanding what is the space like, space industry, like what are people in the space industry doing. So, and then when we graduated, like a bunch of my friends stepped into aviation, so I have a lot of friends in that domain. And then I think I was the only one who said, okay, aviation is not that interesting for me, so
Okay.
let me to like the space sector and so on. So but I would say often I think people undervalue like the experience that you can get from doing these kinds of side projects.
But
uh, Obviously getting your grades or other things are also important, but also I think getting hands-on experience even in a sector that you like, it could be any sector at the end, is more important, because at the end, for any young person, I think most people will ask you what do you know, not in terms of like the bookish knowledge, but actually what have you actually built by your hand, or what experiences that you have that make you do certain things, and not just learn by heart or whatever, the things that are there, and vomit in exam. So I think it's more important today that people like do projects and you work with teams, because you're simply simulating an environment in a professional setting. So because obviously we were fighting a lot between ourselves, we were managing a small budget of money that we were putting in by ourselves, we were managing different roles in the team. So it becomes a very company sort of an environment, although when doing it. So you are simulating a lot of these things. So that's why I think projects and live projects are one of the best ways of learning.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with whatever you said, and somewhere or the other, we, with that same objective only, we brought this challenge so that students can also go ahead, and all the undergraduate people, they get a chance, they get to build something new, they get to innovate on something new and present this. Because yeah, as whatever you said, it is bookish knowledge. It's all good. It's all great. Absolutely awesome. But these are also some things which you should also go ahead and participate, team coordination and everything. So yeah, that is what brought us to the Space Science Challenge. Well, that was a great experience, and we do learn a lot of things with building all these hypers, as you have said. Basics of the knowledge and all the things we just learn from the scratch up, and then that's it. That's all we have. So, well, thank you so much for answering that question. So, as we have talked about, you were originally from which branch exactly?
Mechanical engineering.
Mechanical engineering, right? So that brings us to the or another question which we have is that how important is one educational background to venture into the field of space sciences?
Yeah, I mean, this is again a very interesting question, because a lot of people believe that you need to study something about space to be in the space sector, which is wrong. So like 95% of the people in the space industry are not really space scientists themselves. There's a portion of space scientists, but most of the people who are doing a lot of things are like either electrical engineers, electronics engineers, mechanical engineers, software engineers, stuff like that, right? So I think you can come from any field today and get into the space sector, so long as you have like some level of expertise, and you build up the knowledge of this sector. I'll give you a couple of recent examples. I deal with a couple of customers of ours,
Hmm.
and recently they've been producing some of these umbrella type of antennas, so where the antenna is folded and then it opens up like an antenna, like an umbrella in
Yep.
space, right?
It's
So they have recently employed somebody who comes from like a tailoring background, because
okay.
they wanted somebody who has that kind of professional setting tailoring experience, to tell the mechanical engineers how do you actually like create those webbings, and create those kinds of stuff based on the professional experience that that person has. And they've also brought in somebody who's like an origami expert, because who can
Going to
bring in
compact it.
how
Yeah.
do you fold it together in a way that it works very well without risk and so on, right?
Right.
So there's all kinds of people who are stepping into the industry, and they can come from different backgrounds at the end. Yeah, I mean, at the end, there's too many people who fascinate themselves around rocketry, which is natural, because person you like seeing things that blow up, or that go up at the end. But then you have to kind of be able to choose, because uh, obviously there is only a very small percentage of people who work on rocketry related stuff, and especially coming out of a place like India, except some of the new companies that are out there, it becomes very hard to build any career around rocketry at the end. So, but it's not impossible. But the likelihood of succeeding there also is very very challenging at the end. So you'll have to, I guess, listen to yourself and know what you want to do at the end, and what you want to be good at, and then look at what are the existing roles, and what are the existing companies, and then what is the skill set that they are demanding, and then mold yourself according to that. So and if you don't have any like ideas, or you're not really inspired by anything, I would say then go with something generic. Like for example, you can never get wrong by having knowledge of like embedded systems, or computing or things like that, right? Because you can go into any field with that kind of knowledge. So if you're somebody who is not really found what they like, and you believe that you only like some part of computing or some part of something else, just try to build up expertise there. So the critical thing is not like spreading yourself very thin. It's good to have a little bit of knowledge in everything, but you need to kind of know, okay, what is your strength, and where will you actually build some more deep knowledge and experience.
All right. Well, thank you so much for answering that question. So now, well, Prashant is also saying, and yep, Saurav is also saying a few things related to that as well. That how aeronautics, we are taught that aeronautics engineering go through that, and yeah. So now we know that it's not really needed. We can be from any field and we can still contribute to the satellite industry. Not only satellite industry, in any industry, we did definitely look out for all the people who are willing to contribute any manners whatsoever. So, now we'll proceed forward to all the or your work with various companies, various startups to establish. So, are there any what do we say? Are there any steps that need to be followed by space startups to grow and establish as a brand?
Again, like space startups are very difficult to do. They are one of the most challenging things that you can do industry, because unlike in many other industries, you cannot recall something. Like if you build a car, if something goes wrong, you can recall the car and fix the car. And it's not something like that in space. You throw something, and then the possibility of getting that back is almost like zero at the end. So it becomes very challenging. So the problem with the space industry is that normally it takes like 7 to 10 years for any space company to even like establish like a baseline product at the end. And you need like a deep amount of capital and resources, especially if you're building some things. But if you're doing something that uses satellite imagery, or doing some sort of applications, for agriculture or other industries, that's more easier, because there is no big capital investment. You can work from home, use cloud computing and things like that. So to build your product. So, but then the most important part of any business is to get customers. The
Correct.
problem with the space industry often is that there are too many engineers trying to build products for which there are no customers at the end. And so it's very important to know that whatever you're building is sustainable. And the only way you can sustain something is if you have enough revenue, if you have enough money coming in from paying customers, right? So I would say a good way of knowing what to build as a company and a brand is to go out and meet with potential customers and ask them how much are they willing to pay for a certain solution, and then building that solution around the problem, right? So uh, people call it like an MVP version, for example, that you build like an MVP version or something, and then you test out the market and you get some money from potential customers, and then that gives you some kind of a validation that something is needed. So, and most often it will be people who will just say, I want to build a rocket, without even asking any customer as if they want to like get that service from them, and if they want to, at what price, and so on. So it's really important, I would say, that people really understand what is the problem of a particular customer, and provide a solution around that particular problem. And if you just say, my dream is to build something, I mean, so long as your parents have enough money and you have enough money in the bank, it can be a hobby project at the end. But if you want to run it like as a business, then it'll not sustain if you don't have enough to go on for a long time, right? So the only way to build a brand is actually to have revenue and have customers, and then you can then build on top of that. So, and I've done these mistakes by myself as well. So it's not like I've got everything right.
Mhm.
But then you should have it in you that you can carry on doing certain mistakes without having to burn out, or having to take massive amounts of debt or so on, so that you can never come back. So that's the main challenge in building a company at the end.
All right. So basically, it's problem, solution, and money involvement. Right.
Yeah,
That is, and customers. Yeah, the customers are the one who pay the money. So yeah,
yeah.
that's how we see. All right. So now all the space startups have been flourishing throughout in these past 2 years during the pandemic. So how exactly has COVID-19 affected space startups in a positive or a negative way?
I would say it's a mixed bag, because one of the things that has happened because of COVID is, especially companies who are simply working on end user solutions, like if they're working for solutions for like banks or agriculture, or many other end user industries, they are simply using satellite data. For them, it's really good because people are working from home, and they're saving a lot of time, spending a lot of time with their family and so on. So that's been good for especially the teams that are working on such things. But then obviously, if you're building like a satellite or a rocket, and then your team is COVID affected, you cannot build satellites and rockets from your house. So you can do some sort of coding from internet on those things, but then often you need to, if you want to put them together, you need to be in a lab environment. So those have been really, I think, affected quite a lot. But yeah, I mean, not to an extent where other industries are affected, I would suppose, because space is still a very small industry, considering automotive industry or other industries, aviation industry, or so on, right? So I would say lesser impact from the other industries, but more impact on upstream hardware development,
Mhm.
and lesser impact on people who are working on applications.
All right. That is about what COVID has brought to the space startups and how it has affected them. So now, uh, all these industries or all these startups, what is or how is the satcom industry predicted to grow? And again, what is the future of startups in this particular sector?
Satcom is the biggest industry in the space, within the space industry, biggest sector. So if you look at like the overall revenue that the space industry generates, most of it comes from the Satcom sector. So it comes from stuff like DTH that people are watching from their home. It comes from broadband. It comes from IoT, and things like that, right? So it's one of the areas where people are betting the most amount of money. So, for example, Starlink from SpaceX, and Amazon and OneWeb are all aimed at providing broadband solutions, and they've put in a lot of money into those problems. Or it could also be like low data rate connectivity, like for example, logistics. In case like VRL is driving around a truck in the middle of nowhere in India, and you want them to be connected, and there is no cell phone connectivity to that place. You can provide
Mhm.
them with satellite connectivity with IoT, and you can know where the truck is, or what the status of the packages are, or things like that, right? So it's really a question of there is always going to be a huge market for satcom, because you cannot put towers on the ocean, you cannot put towers in the air, up in the sky.
Yeah.
So and you cannot put towers in every nook and corner of the world, right? So you can put it in some second, like cities, second tier, third tier, fourth tier towns, but beyond
Yeah.
that, it becomes unjustifiable for this infrastructure to be put in, right? So all of these places are where you will see people using satellite communication, and it will continue to be one of the markets. But yeah, but that this is also a trend where let's say somebody is from a rural part of I don't know, northeast, or in the Himalayan belt, or so on. This still allows them to work from home, so long as they have satellite connectivity, right? So they can go back to their hometown or village, and if they do have a connection there at a reasonable price, they may save a tremendous amount of money not paying rents, which is probably 10 times more expensive in bigger towns like Mumbai and Bangalore. And then stay with their family, enjoy the time with their family, and then still work from wherever they are, right? So these are like the productivity things that the satellite industry will provide as a solution for people, right? So, and it's the same with banks, for example. If you want an ATM to function in in the middle of nowhere, uh, for example, then you want to draw some money out and pay people there, you need to have some sort of connection at the end, and that's provided again by satellites and so on. So there are many use cases for the satcom industry, and it's a question of how deeply do you understand the problem. The problems that I talk to you about is everyday problems, but unfortunately most people will not know that the solution is provided by satcom connectivity
Satellites.
at the end, right? So and that's the irony of the whole thing. So but then if you, I'm sure that many people who are listening also may know or would have faced these kinds of problems by themselves, where they thought, oh, if I had some kind of cell phone connectivity or some kind of connectivity, it would be more productive for me to doing something. And so if you are finding something like that, then I would say you should think about how you could solve it, and maybe make a space startup around that.
All right, so now the guys, now you have a new idea on what to build or what exactly to work forward with. So yeah, that is great. And yeah, one more thing, guys, if you have anything or if you have any questions, you can please go ahead and write down in the chat section as well. We'll take up a few questions in the chat. So if you guys have anything to ask, please go ahead and mention them in the chat so that we can take them later on and proceed with the session. So feel free to ask your questions in the chat section. All right. Yeah, so we'll be picking up all the questions. Don't worry. And apart from Saurav's question, we'll take up the rest of the questions. All right. So don't worry about that. All right. So now we have seen that how important Satcom industry is and how it is growing and what are the various use cases. Without knowing, we are kind of using the Satcom industry. So yeah, that is great. And so next time be a little cautious as to what exactly or which industry you are utilizing when you're doing something. All right. So the next question which we get a lot from the students is that um, how can anyone or how can students start with building their own mini satellites, or how do they procure the funding, the platforms for the same? So that is the major question which we get a lot. How can they go ahead and build the same?
Yeah, I think satellites are not that cheap at the end if you want to fly them, and if you have to have them work in space. So, but then one of the things that you can do is buy stuff like microcontrollers, and start programming them, and then you can do that off of very cheap stuff, right? So, for example,
Mhm.
one of the things that you can simulate, cheaply on the ground is if you want to send data from one place to the other remotely, and for example, if you want to take a picture from a camera. So this is what normally satellites do. Either you put a camera on a satellite, or you simulate some data exchange through a satellite, and those are the basic functionalities. So there's nothing that stops you from buying a, a very small camera that costs like 300 400 rupees, using an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi, or even you can even program your own board to be able to capture those images. And then you can also start making a little bit more complicated things like attaching an RF module to it, and then trying to transmit that data remotely to another receiver, that you can then receive that information, and then doing all sorts of these simulated things that are out there. So this is one of the ways in which you can spend, I would say, like less than 10,000 rupees maybe, or 5,000 rupees, and getting a lot of that information, simulation of the whole thing, and trying to do this. So you can also perhaps test it out as line of sight simulation. So for example, if you want to have transmission of data between two things over 100 meters, or things like that. So those are also some of the things that you can do at the end. So it really is a question of not really like going after things that that cost a lot of money, and then just saying that no matter what, I will have to fly something on a rocket, or I will not be able to do anything at all. I would say like you can also start very small and spend very little money and do something that simulates a lot of the more complicated things. So this is almost like 80% of the work that you would do in any case. Or, the rest 20% is actually when you fly something that is closer to space. But doing all of these things are already like 80% of the work. So you're getting all of that experience at like not even 10% of the cost if you're doing all of these things. So that's how I think you can build one of the cheapest ways in which you can get some experience.
All right. So, yep, so that is what we know, or that is how you can also go ahead and build your own satellites as well. Very easy, very simple. You can start small and maybe, yep. All right, 1 second. Yeah, so maybe you can go ahead and start small, and then you can maybe go forward with, and then build your own satellite. And we also have, or there is some great news for you guys as well when it comes to satellites, and that is, we have recently, or there has been recent information. There's been recent news about ISRO. I mean, in space, yeah. So they have said that recently they launch not one, not two, but 75 student satellites next year. That is the news given by ISRO, and that they will launch 75 student satellites next year. So you guys have great chance of going ahead and going forward with your satellites, and that would be launched by ISRO. So what do you think about this initiative by ISRO, that of launching 75 student satellites next year?
I think it's a great experience because I was involved with a lot of friends of mine who built the first student satellite in India from NMIT and so on. So that was a long, long time ago. But now we have so much initiative from ISRO itself in appreciating a lot of these students in doing stuff right. Normally, as a rule of thumb, like just launching the cost of launching itself could be something like 20 to 30 thousand dollars for like a 1 kilogram satellite at the end. So if ISRO is giving students that kind of an opportunity, it's actually great that they're subsidizing a lot of that. Um I mean, the challenge, of course, is always not the students themselves, but actually the universities and the faculty, because most often building satellites is not covered under any grade. It does not attach to any campus placement. It is not attached to getting any sort of medal or whatever at the end. So it the problem is that the for a lot of the universities, maybe it's a PR opportunity to getting a news article on the front page of a whatever, of a newspaper. But then for the students, it's a completely different thing at the end. So, and the challenge, I think, is for students to convince their faculty to be able to support them in getting this going, rather than anything else. And that's a very tough job to do, because it's not very easy for somebody to just say, give me this support, while they themselves may not have any experience. Because unlike people in ISRO, most of the universities, colleges, even in if you go to many IITs, perhaps you will not find faculty who have experience in space specific sector. So which means that it really boils down to how do you get somebody who is ultimately responsible, who has to give you the clearance to be working on this thing, to give you the opportunity right at the end. So um, and so that's the challenge to most of the students. So it's not normally the technical part of it that comes much later. But I think significantly the challenge is actually getting support from your institutions, getting support from your faculty and so on. And whoever is able to get that, I think they are very lucky at the end.
Okay, so well, again, that's a great initiative, but yeah, good luck in uh, convincing your faculties and universities for going ahead and allowing you guys to work in this, or to work in this, and launch first student satellites. So that thing, that would be great. So looking forward to the 75 student satellites launch next year. So that would be great. In other news, it was recently reported that in India, the desire to work in the space sector is higher then Europe, Australia, and the United States of America. What do you think could be the driving force for this?
So there are some interesting, statistics around this, right? So one is, I think India is undergoing like a huge technology revolution,
Uh,
and that's a big part of the inspiration because maybe like 15 years ago we did not have such good internet connectivity or such good resources that are available for openly for a lot of the people and so on, right? So one of the things that has happened in the last 10 years is really the companies that have been formed, starting from even like the e-commerce companies to other companies that are out there. But today, I think people see like young people have a lot more opportunity in terms of access and so on, right? So and also, I think there's a lot of like inspiration that comes to a lot of these folks from seeing stuff like ISRO launch on a routine basis, or seeing some of the young startups that are trying to do incredibly hard things and getting inspired from all of that. So I think there's inherently like a lot of talent and a lot of desire from a lot of students who see all of these things. They connect with a lot of these things that are happening in the public sphere. But yeah, I mean, it's also the sheer number of students itself who are from India, right? So you have
mm,
crazy number of people who are studying in India compared to a lot of other countries, because most of the other countries are older countries. Like, if you in Germany, for example, the average age is
yeah,
like 45, 46, and in India it's like 26 or 27. So there is a lot of age gap itself in the society
uh,
at the end. So the sheer number of young people who are available in India itself is quite a huge number at the end. And a lot of people are getting into newer technologies, right? So they are getting into electric vehicles, they're getting into drones, they're getting into, like, obviously, other than satellites, there are so many other new sectors that people are getting into. These are all cutting edge technologies that people want to be associated with. So naturally, space features as one of the core parts of this cutting edge technology. And obviously, anybody, if you go ask any, I don't know, like fifth grader or fourth grader, and you put a bunch of professions that saying which one do you want to be, and put an astronaut in there, I would say like 90% of the people will say I want to be an astronaut, right? It's just the inspiration and the feel factor that is associated with that will bring young people to this. So I mean, if you make a survey that says, how many of you want to work in SpaceX, for example, I'm pretty sure that like 80-90% of the people will say I want to work there.
Yep, because of I mean, SpaceX, we know what it is famous for, and maybe because of that, well, people are looking forward to that as well. So now
Yeah.
we'll pick up a few questions from the audience, which we are having, and guys, you can also go ahead and write down your question. So we have a question, and that is, do you think it will help in developing a new generation of workforce that can help to fill up the skill gaps of space engineering in India?
Yeah, I mean, the real question there is actually what are the skills actually needed by existing companies, and are the skills that are being developed match those existing companies that are out there, right? So uh, unfortunately, in India, there are two kinds of companies that absorb talent in the space industry. One is really like the ISRO vendor base, where they're working on some routine missions, and it's more of production and quality control that they're associated with. And obviously, you will not be able to get paid a lot in that kind of a business because they don't own the full product. So they are simply playing the role of a support and manufacturing at the end. It's almost as if you're like running a call center business, but in high tech at the end, right? So you're expected to deliver something with high quality, but you will not get paid a lot in doing that, right? So in that case, the skill set is mostly more than skill set. I think they're just looking for people who are committed to being in that role and can work in those roles, and continue carry on doing that without thinking a lot or doing a lot of research and development by themselves. And there's not really a lot of initiative that you can take. It's mostly you want to be just involved in producing something routinely, you can go stick to those drones, right? And so that may not be something that everybody who is really inspired to doing something will look forward to on a day-to-day basis at the end. So the second one really is what these a lot of the new companies are looking for. And in there, I think the problem really is, um, the skill gap is really the diversity needed in the teams itself to be able to fill those roles, because people generally need good engineers, and often it may not be space specific knowledge that they need, right? So for example,
Okay.
if you go to a propulsion company, they may need
Mhm.
like chemical engineers, they may need uh, chemists at the end. They may need people who are so it's a diverse amount of skill set that you need. People who understand chemistry at the end, at the core of it, because propulsion is at the end chemistry and reactions, and people need to understand that as a background. But at the same time, if you look at who then can bring into that talent to the industry, then you need to go fish out people who are very good in chemistry and chemical engineering, and then bring them to the space industry. So the real talent gap is actually identifying these sorts of requirements, and kind of giving a pathway to those people to come in to our industry. And it could be any other as well. So for example, you look at electronics, for example, you look at communication like radio engineering, or you look at embedded systems, or cloud computing, any of these things. You don't need to build like very space specific knowledge. At the end, you need to like have somebody who is really good at the basics in that sector, who can then be oriented towards space at the end, right? So I mean, that's how most of the companies here in Europe and other places work. So there's very little number of people who will say, I'm an astrophysicist. I mean, there is a job for an astrophysicist, but there are very little number of astrophysicists in companies. They are normally researchers and scientists in some research institutions. Unless you're working on some trajectory design at a big company like Airbus or so on, it becomes very hard for you to find a actual job being like a core scientist, right? In that sort of a role, which is core astrophysics and so on. So yeah, like 90% of the roles in actual space industry are, if you can bring those talents and then orient them into the space industry and work with the companies, because at the end, people spend a lot of time and money in identifying the right kind of talent. And the gap is really working with those companies and understanding the roadmap that they have for hiring, and then looking at what can you bring as talent to them.
All right. So thank you so much for answering that question. It was a wonderful question. Next, we have a question about your thoughts on the market of astropharmacy in India.
I mean, it's a very interesting question. At the end, it's a question that you have to go discover yourself. Um, the thing is, the pharmaceutical market in India is very interesting, because India is one of the largest pharmaceutical manufacturers in the world. But the real question there is there intent for them to like spend so much money in R&D at the end, right? So normally what happens in India in the pharmaceutical sector is, there's a lot of reverse engineering of drugs that are done,
Mhm.
so that they can produce it more cheaply in India and can distribute it around the world as generic drugs, right? And a lot of the research spending is on such research, where you're really like reverse engineering a lot of the drugs in the Western market or so on, right? So but the question really is there a market for people
Astro.
kind, yeah, like people kind of saying, I will I want to do something original in spending some money in microgravity and so on. So for example, we work with a company in Japan called Space BD, and they do work with some of the pharmaceutical companies in Japan, for example, biotech and pharmaceutical companies, and they routinely send out samples to the space station. And normally these are in very small test tubes. So each test tube costs like $10,000 or something like that. It's pretty expensive for it to be sent up and then brought back, so that you can sample that and test that on the Earth, right? So the question is, is there appetite for companies to spend that kind of money to be able to do that kind of work? And that's a discover I mean, that's a question that you'll have to go find an answer for by talking to the right companies, the relevant companies out there. If you have, I mean, obviously these companies are pretty big in India as well. But the question is, is their R&D oriented towards doing such work at the end? So if the answer is, you find is yes, they are oriented around this, then you have a market at the end, and you can try to find out what prices that they're willing to pay. And if the answer is no, really, then you have to look for something else, or you have to look for some of the companies and other places.
All right. Well, thank you so much for answering that question. That was a wonderful question. Next we have, yep. All right. So next we have a question that how can we expand India's share in the global space economy?
I mean, that's a pretty simple answer. So one is, you try to do what the IT industry has done. Basically, you provide more services and products out of India, and you can then build more and more into the space economy in the world. Uh, Most of the companies in India are dependent on ISRO as their only customer, and
Hmm.
main problem, because if you depend only on ISRO, and they are your only customer, then you don't have a lot of room to scale, because ISRO's budgets are not doubling every year, or it's increasing. They're not building like 10 times more number of satellites and rockets in 2 years time. So you will not really grow so much as a business at the end. So the only thing that you can do to grow very big is really to have your own product or a service that you can sell in India and sell to people outside of India at the end. So if you're able to do that, the number of companies that are trying to do that now, they have a much better possibility of scaling to be a bigger business than any of the other businesses that are working with this at the end. So it's really a question of, do you have the intent and the will and to take that kind of risk, and do you have any product that actually can sell in every part of the world at the end. So that's the key question. So if you're able to produce something like that, obviously, you can see that India will automatically occupy a bigger share of the world space economy.
All right. Thank you so much for answering that question. So we have almost come to the end of this session. So we'll 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 end up with a few generic questions, and that is, what's your advice for the participants of the Space Science Challenge 2022?
I think one is, find good teammates that you can then build long-lasting relationship with, and you can work on something much deeper. Often, like uh, small of the, a lot of these kinds of challenges can be stepping stone towards bigger things that you can then do. And most often, you want to do things with people you like at the end. So I think it's important to just use the opportunity to know how to work with other people, and to manage yourself in a team, for example, and try to do something that you think is not just like your imagination, but something that the world kind of needs, at the end. So it's if you're managing kind of both of them, then I think it's a great step at the end. But then it's also a great step already, because you're doing something that many others are not doing by participating in the challenge in itself. So that's already a good first step at the end. But then I think, if you are participating in the challenge, not just don't just think about like finishing something because you finished the challenge in itself. I would say like the mindset should be that this challenge is just the first thing that you will do in the process, but then you will try to do something where you carry on doing the same thing with the same kind of people, and hopefully if you're able to do that, then you're able to build something that really can give you open a lot more opportunities for you in the future.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the wonderful suggestion, and I hope you guys would take up these things in your mind while participating or while competing in the Space Science Challenge 2022. And now, another question which we get is that, well, we talked about engineers, but what about people from non-engineering background? How can they begin their journey in the field of satellite engineering? I mean, you definitely did talk about origamists and tailors, but how, I mean, what is or how do or anyone can jump into the field of satellite engineering?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there is a lot of space for non in the space industry, but it's a question of what is your expertise. So it's very rare that non-engineers do engineering, but they play support to engineers. Let's say, right. So in case of the example that I gave with the tailor and an origami expert, they're really bringing their experience, and they don't understand anything. That's for an antenna, for example, right? So they don't really understand how do you actually build an antenna from a mechanical perspective, as a mechanical engineer, or how do you work around the RF characteristics as a radio frequency engineer. But then they are working with these two groups of engineers to make that happen, with their own talent in place, right? So, and that's really, a good way of thinking at the end. So you could be somebody who comes in, for example, from an insurance background, for example, right? A completely non-engineering background, but then you could say, I understand the insurance industry extremely well. So, but then I want to work with a bunch of space engineers to, or imaging engineers, geospatial engineers, to see if I can get them to give me this data so that I can apply this data into insurance models. And so that way, you're having a skill which the geospatial engineers don't have, of knowing the how the insurance industry works, and you're using their talent to build something that the world wants, at the end. So you can do that with any sector at the end. So you can be, in the food industry or in the food supply chain, and you want to say, I want to know how procurement can be helped. I want to know what quality of crops are grown in what regions, and how can I buy them at the right price at the right time, and give that advice to somebody, at the end. It could be any sort of work at the end. So it's ultimately a question of, do you like doing that, and are you able to find the right kind of people to work with, at the end. Because normally, like, non-engineers will have to work with engineers in getting a product out at the end. So it's just a question of attaching yourself, or either building your a team with you of engineers, or attaching yourself into a team that is looking for something around, or so on. So, or if you're, for example, a pretty good person who is a business developer, for example, there's a lot of people in the space industry who come from backgrounds of international politics, or places like that, where you would never imagine that. There's a company here in Berlin that we work with, whose head of business development is a PhD in psychology. So she has done all her work and previous studies in psychology, but somehow she stepped into the space industry, and she is today heading the business development for a space company that has like 200 people here in Berlin. So it's always possible. It's a question of how do you prove your value to somebody, and that's the summary of the whole thing.
Again, well, thank you so much for answering that question. It was a wonderful explanation. How and really inspiring as well, that how even people are still heading, or there are such good positions. That is, I think, that is itself a great job. And we'll like to end up this entire session with a short question, and that is, which book or movie inspired you the most to pursue your dreams? Any favorite movie of yours? Anything which you like to recommend? Any book or movie? I think
I
I think yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think books. You have said that you don't really read books, so maybe you can go
Yeah,
for with
yeah,
any movies
yeah,
also.
yeah. No, I mean, I do read some books, obviously. I like biographies normally. Uh, it's one of the boring categories that people don't read at the. So I used to read a lot of biographies of space people. Like, for example, I read biographies of Korolev, or Werner von Braun, or many others that are out there. So I think you can learn a lot from, like, understanding what those people went through in the early days of space exploration, to really understand what they went into. So I read a lot about, like, Yuri Gagarin biography of how Sputnik was put together, or a lot of space history related things that I really liked. So that I would like, if you want to like know what are the struggles that the industry went through to get a lot of things going, there's a lot of material that you can read. Even in India, you can have find a lot of interesting books. There's one from Gopal Raj called Reach for the Stars. It's about how India established the whole rocketry program. And it's a wonderful book about it. There's some history, space history books recently published by former chairman of ISRO, a few other scientists. Those are also pretty good. Movies, I would say, like I like documentaries. So
Okay.
there's a 6 episode documentary on BBC on the space
Uh-huh.
race. Uh,
Uh-huh.
I think that has been most well produced documentaries that I've ever seen in the space industry, because it's like 6 episodes produced by BBC on how the Cold War involved space between
Mhm.
Russia and Soviet Union, and how
Okay.
they were playing against each other and what all the things that they did. So it's, if you want to spend the entire evening watching something that is related to space and get a lot of inspiration and yeah, interest, I would say go watch that BBC 6 episode series on the space race.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Definitely. Space Race, I think I'll definitely go ahead and visit that. Space Race looks good. Okay, I'll go ahead and definitely visit Space Race. And well, that brings us to the end of this session. So, well, thank you so much, guys, for tuning in for this session. And thank you so much, Dr. Narayan Prasad, for uh, attending or for coming to this session and clarifying all the questions of the students and as well my questions also. So, guys, we'll see you again tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. We have another session with Mr. Ghanim Alotaibi. So we'll be having another live session with again a satellite judge. So well, stay tuned for that. And with that, we come to the end of the session. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you guys again tomorrow, 5:30 p.m. same place. And yeah, that is it. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you so much, Dr. Nayan Prasad. And see you guys again. Have a great day, great night, whatever time zone you are in.
Thanks.
Bye.